In the same area where he had committed an earlier murder that day, 19-year-old Keith Moses callously killed a 9-year-old girl and a news reporter. Despite his heinous crime, the teenager displayed no remorse and was observed smirking as he was taken into custody by the police. However, the question remains as to what motivated him to commit these atrocious crimes. The events leading up to the tragedy begin on February 22, 2023 at approximately 10:30 a.m. On that day, a man known only as Dave was driving around his neighborhood of Pine Hills in Orlando, Florida, accompanied by his friend of 6 years, Natasha Augustine, an aspiring rapper who went by the name Honey D. Described by her loved ones as a caring and passionate person, Natasha and Dave were simply hanging out in the car, smoking, when they encountered Keith Kelvin Moses, who happened to be Dave's cousin. Despite only being 19 years old, Keith was a known gang member with a long criminal history dating back to his childhood, including charges for firearm possession, grand theft auto, domestic robbery, and armed robbery. Although Keith had accumulated most of his criminal record as a juvenile, he had only one arrest as an adult in 2021 for possessing a small amount of marijuana.
When you have a quantity that low, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement does not test the substance, and that means the state attorney's office cannot prove the case.
The quantity was so insignificant that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement did not even test it, and as a result, the state attorney's office was unable to prove the case. On the day of the tragic incident, Steve noticed that Keith appeared down and offered him a ride in an attempt to lift his spirits. However, this decision would prove to be a grave mistake. Keith got into the back seat of the car and sat directly behind Natasha. For approximately 30 seconds, everything seemed normal, but suddenly, Keith produced a Glock semi-automatic handgun and shot Natasha in the back of the head. Steve slammed on the brakes in a panic, causing the car to come to a stop. Before Steve could react, Keith fled the scene, leaving Natasha's lifeless body outside the passenger side of the vehicle. The police were immediately summoned to the scene on Hastings Street. Steve, who was still present at the crime scene, provided investigators with a detailed account of the events that occurred, including the fact that the shooter was his cousin Keith. Steve stated that Keith had been acting strangely and sweating in the car before he pulled out his gun and shot Natasha in the chin from the back seat. Initially, the police believed that the shooting was gang-related or a form of retaliation for a previous incident. However, Steve clarified that Keith and Natasha did not know each other and had not been involved in any altercation. It was simply a random act of violence. Crime scene investigators spent several hours at the scene gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses before departing at around 3:30 p.m., unaware that this was just the beginning of a series of tragic events. Dylan Lyons, a talented and motivated journalist, took his job seriously and was passionate about his work. Originally from Philadelphia, Dylan graduated from the University of Central Florida and had recently landed his dream job as a reporter for Spectrum News in Orlando.
He was very energetic, enthusiastic, he was very driven, he was passionate about doing this.
Dylan, who was 24 years old, was engaged to Casey Fite, and the couple had plans of starting a family together. He was also very close to his family and acted as a father figure to his niece and nephew, whom he cherished dearly. On the day of the incident, Dylan and photojournalist Jesse Walden were assigned to cover the shooting in Pine Hills. When they arrived at the scene, it was already 3:59 p.m., and the situation had begun to calm down. Jesse parked their unmarked van near the crime scene and went back to set up his camera, while Dylan remained inside the van, typing on his computer. The two journalists were so engrossed in their work that they failed to notice a man approaching them with a gun.
As I'm about to open my trunk, I hear gunshots, and I feel that I get hit. I feel some pain in my groin. And I turn around and I'm like, oh, there must be a drive-by shooting going on. And I see that he's shooting at me.
Keith Moses was the same individual responsible for the earlier shooting, and he had returned to the crime scene to continue his violent spree. A call was made to the Orange County Sheriff's Department at approximately 4:05 p.m., reporting that a man resembling Keith had come back to the area and was firing shots at news reporters. Witnesses described the suspect's appearance, and police officers quickly arrived at the scene. Unfortunately, by that time, Keith had already fatally shot Dylan in the chest at close range, while Jesse had sustained critical injuries after being shot in the groin. He was immediately taken to the hospital, where he thankfully survived. Despite the presence of numerous police officers at the scene, it would have been reasonable to expect Keith to flee and not do anything reckless. However, that was not the case. Keith apparently had more violence planned. He knew that the police were on his tail and reportedly walked into a nearby house where 9-year-old Tiona Major lived with her family. Tiona was a third-grade student at Pine Hills Elementary and was known for her cheerful and sociable nature, her love for dance and gymnastics, and her academic excellence.
Always top of her class, reading at a 5th grade level. I mean, that just doesn't happen overnight. She is amazing.
Being able to read at a 5th grade level. These accomplishments were not achieved overnight. Tiona had just returned home from school and was getting ready for dance practice while waiting for her father to arrive. Her mother, Brandy, was taking a nap in her bedroom before her night shift when she heard Tiona scream, "He shot me." Keith had managed to enter the house through the unlocked sliding back door, which the family occasionally used to let their dog in and out. Once inside, he began firing at the innocent little girl. Tiona ran to her mother's bedroom, where Brandy tried to shield her from the gunfire, but Keith continued to shoot, hitting Tiona in the stomach and Brandy in the arm. Brandy quickly took Tiona and locked themselves in the master bathroom before calling 911. Although the police arrived at the scene within seconds, Keith managed to flee once again. Unfortunately, Tiona was later found dead in her mother's arms. The community was deeply affected by these heinous killings and struggled to make sense of the senseless violence.
Deputies located 2 men who had been shot in or near a vehicle. They are a News 13 reporter and photographer.
The news of Dylan's death was particularly devastating for his friends and colleagues, with one reporter breaking down in tears as she reported on the tragedy from the hospital. Meanwhile, Keith was apprehended by the police on the same day while he was walking casually near the scene of the crime. The body cam footage of his arrest, which has now gone viral with over 2 million views, shows the officers placing keys on his stomach and handcuffing him as he repeatedly complained about being unable to breathe.
Get on your face! Get on your face! Get on your face! They killing me! They killing me! Roll the fuck over me! They killing me! They killing me! Let me go!
They recovered the gun he had used in the murders, which was now empty. While being taken into custody, Keith's behavior was erratic and concerning. The police noted that his pupils were dilated, suggesting he was under the influence of drugs. As he complained of breathing difficulties, he was taken to the hospital for a checkup. However, he became aggressive toward the nurses and had to be subdued by the officers. When questioned by investigators, he refused to speak and instead made gun gestures while grinning. During his transportation to the sheriff's office, he feigned sleep to avoid answering questions, but officers noticed that he was fidgeting and making faces. At one point, when he was alone in the interview room, he stood up and looked directly at the camera. However, when the officers returned and tried to talk to him, he again pretended to be asleep while smiling at them. Keith Moses made an attempt to escape from the interrogation room and engaged in a physical altercation with officers when they tried to subdue him. Eventually, he was charged with several counts of murder, including first-degree murder in the case of Natasha Augustine. He pleaded not guilty to the charges and is presently in custody without bail, awaiting trial. If found guilty, he could receive a life sentence or even the death penalty. The motive behind his senseless killing spree remains unknown. Alright, guys, what do you think about these cases? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.